Hi, welcome back to the Garden Benchtop. Today, we're going to be looking at a Monstera that I've had in my indoor plant collection for about 1.5 years now. And it's coming along quite nicely, throwing out new leaves and even with some leaves with a little bit of fenestrations. But as you can see from this bird's eye view, it's starting to fall over and favour one side. But there are a few signs that this Monstera is showing that makes me believe that it's ready for a moss pole. And the point of this video is to go through those telltale signs so you'll be able to tell when it's time to install a moss pole for your Monsteras. So let's get into it. Now before we begin analysing this Monstera, I do want to say that not all Monsteras will need a moss pole. It really depends on the growth pattern of your Monstera and whether it is showing signs that a moss pole would benefit it. But if you've been around the Garden Benchtop before, you'll know that I'm a big fan of moss poles. I just love the look of how climbing indoor plants trail themselves up to the moss poles and give that tropical feel. So I'm all for a moss pole, which is why I'm most likely going to be installing a moss pole for this guy. Okay, so if you've had a Monstera before, you'll know that they're famous for their aerial roots. And I'll try and show them to you. They're these little nubbins on the side of the main stems, here and here, and I believe there's another one over here. Now these aerial roots act as an anchor for the Monsteras and supports them as they grow, as they continue to grow. So when they start to develop aerial roots, it's a strong signal that the Monstera is looking for extra support, and that can be provided in the form of a moss pole. So these aerial roots will attach to the moss pole, grow and anchor themselves so that it provides additional support for the leaves as they continue to grow vertically. These aerial roots that form also act as a secondary source of water, which is why I like to use sphagnum moss poles, because they retain water. And actually, for this guy, I'm going to install a self-watering moss pole. And I'll put a link in the description below to my tutorial for building that self-watering moss pole. I do like to do a bit of DIY around the Garden Benchtop. So make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so that you can be informed when we release more DIY videos. The second sign that your Monstera is ready for a moss pole is its growth structure. Now looking at this particular Monstera from a bird's eye view, you can see it's starting to grow horizontally. So rather than naturally growing vertically like it should be, it's starting to actually fall over. And you can see that if I try and tip this. You can see that these leaves are trying to grow vertically, but the weight of the plant and the top leaves is pulling it down. So by installing a moss pole, we'll be able to attach these main stems to the moss pole, and the growing structure will be more vertical and the leaves will straighten out like they should be. The other advantage of having a Monstera grow vertically rather than horizontally is that it will take up less room. As you can see, this is much easier to accommodate rather than a plant that is falling over and spreading out. Now the third reason why I believe this Monstera is ready for a moss pole is because it's starting to outgrow its pot. You can see this is quite a small pot for the size of this Monstera. And I can tell that this Monstera may need repotting very shortly because the soil dries out very quickly, which means this plant requires a bigger water source. That additional water that can actually be supplemented by a sphagnum moss pole, because as we discussed earlier, these aerial roots will anchor themselves into the sphagnum moss and will be able to absorb water from the sphagnum moss and act as a secondary source of water for this Monstera, meaning this Monstera would actually be fine in this pot with a moss pole. Okay, so the fourth reason why I believe this Monstera is looking for a new moss pole is that the leaves are starting to get bigger, but as a result, they're getting a bit top heavy, pulling the plant down. Now, truth be told, this is one of the main reasons why I want to install a moss pole for this Monstera. The leaves are becoming quite big and beautiful, but they don't have their fenestrations yet. And as with most indoor plant enthusiasts who buy a Monstera, we're after those beautifully fenestrated leaves with the splits. And I want to run an experiment with this Monstera to see if installing a moss pole will help it grow and mature and ultimately achieve those fenestrations that we're all after. So I'm actually going to be providing updates on this Monstera with its moss pole to see if it achieves what I hope it achieves with the fenestrations. I really do believe with this Monstera, once it's able to establish itself on the moss pole with its aerial roots, I do believe it'll reach maturity quicker and it'll start producing those fenestrated leaves. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when I release those updates on this Monstera and its moss pole. Okay, and the fifth and final reason why I believe that this Monstera is desperately needing a moss pole, because recently I've noticed that the rate of growth of this Monstera has actually slowed down. It was releasing 2 to 3 leaves every couple of months. Recently, it's only produced 1, maybe 2 leaves. And that is also a sign that this Monstera is a bit stunted and needs a bit of help. So by installing a moss pole, it'll be able to accelerate the growth and continue growing healthily. So there you have it, guys. The 5 reasons why I believe this Monstera desperately needs a moss pole. I honestly think that a moss pole will truly benefit this plant, and ultimately what I'm hoping to achieve is acceleration of the maturation process for this Monstera and achieving those fenestrated leaves. So like I said before, make sure to like and subscribe this video. In the True Garden Benchtop forum, we'll be providing updates as these experiments progress, so you can learn and become a better plant parent, which is ultimately what we're all after. Thanks for watching, and go get your hands dirty.